Let's talk about an idea that flips everything you probably assume about life completely on its head. It's a philosophical argument that claims that coming into existence isn't a gift. It's not even neutral. The claim is that being born is always a serious harm. So let's get into it.
And this is not some new, edgy idea from the internet. We're talking over 2,000 years ago. The Greek playwright Sophocles wrote this, and he really hit on something that philosophers have been chewing on ever since. The idea that not existing is actually better than even the very best life.
So that's the big, provocative question we're really digging into here. Not just that life can be tough, we all know that, but that the very act of bringing someone into this world is, in every single case, a deeply negative thing. We're going to walk through the modern philosophical case for why that might actually be true.
All right, so here's our roadmap. We're going to start by looking at what's called the psychological veil, basically how our own brains might be tricking us. Then we'll dive into the core philosophical argument, this idea of an asymmetrical bargain. After that, we'll look at the hard reality of suffering in the world. And finally, we'll unpack the radical solution this all leads to. Okay, first up, before we can even begin to assess if life is good or bad, this argument says we have to look in the mirror. We have to understand our own biases, because as it turns out, our own psychology might be stopping us from seeing things clearly. It all starts with something called the Pollyanna principle. This is a real, documented cognitive bias. We're just hardwired to remember the good times more vividly than the bad times, and we tend to think the future is going to be way rosier than it actually turns out to be. So what does that mean? It means that our own gut feeling, that, hey, my life's pretty good feeling, might be a very unreliable narrator. And it doesn't stop there. We also adapt to bad situations, right? We just get used to them, and our expectations drop over time. We also judge our lives by comparing them to others, which means we kind of ignore all the universal bad stuff, like getting sick, feeling anxious, and, eventually dying, because, hey, it happens to everyone. And well, from an evolutionary perspective, a deeply pessimistic species probably isn't going to be too keen on reproducing. So you put all that together, and what do you get? A pretty powerful idea. Our brains are basically fooling us. If we're hardwired for optimism, we can't just trust our gut feeling that life is a good thing. To really answer the question, we have to try to set our feelings aside and just look at the cold, hard logic of existence. And this leads us right to the philosophical heart of the argument. It all hinges on a concept called asymmetry. This is the idea that pleasure and pain, they're not equal opposites when you're talking about creating a new life. Not at all. Okay, stick with me because this part's a bit of a mind bender, but it is the absolute core of it all. The absence of pain is good. It's a good thing that a potential person who was never born isn't suffering from some horrible disease, right? But the absence of pleasure is not bad. It's just neutral. And why? Because if someone never exists, there's nobody there to be deprived of that pleasure. Nobody is missing out. This little table really lays out the whole bargain. So in scenario A, a person exists. You get both good things, pleasures, and bad things, pains. But now look at scenario B, where the person never exists. The absence of pain is a definite plus. That's good. And the absence of pleasure? It's just not bad. Again, there's no one there to feel deprived. It's a non-issue. So here's the crucial point. When you weigh the two scenarios, non-existence gives you a guaranteed good, the complete avoidance of all pain, while costing you nothing, because there's no one to suffer the disadvantage of missing out on pleasure. Existence, on the other hand, guarantees you will suffer harm. And this logic leads directly to the core conclusion of the entire argument. Because you are absolutely guaranteed to experience harm in life, but you would have suffered no disadvantage by never existing, the act of bringing you into existence has, on balance, done you a disservice. So that's the abstract philosophy of it. But the argument doesn't stop there in the clouds. It then asks us to look, really look, at the world we are actually bringing people into. Remember that Pollyanna principle, our optimism bias? The argument is that it makes us blind to the sheer volume and severity of suffering that is just an inevitable part of being alive. Just consider the scale of what we're talking about here. Think about this for a second. Every single minute of every single day, over 107 people die. That's almost 2 people every second. And for so many of them, that death comes at the end of a long, difficult period of suffering. Right now, as you're hearing this, an estimated 840 million people are suffering from hunger and malnutrition.
That's more than double the entire population of the United States, living in a constant grinding state of physical harm.
And in the 20th century alone, a time we think of as progress, over 109 million people were killed in conflicts. And numbers like these, they don't even begin to scratch the surface of disease, accidents, or the countless forms of personal grief, anxiety, and despair that are a part of every single human life. This all leads to a really stark and frankly disturbing metaphor that procreation is like playing Russian roulette, but with a fully loaded gun aimed at your future child. You can never guarantee they'll have a good life, but you can guarantee they will experience harm. You are forcing someone to take on an immense risk of suffering, a risk they never and could never consent to. So, if our psychology is biased, and the bargain of existence is a bad one, and the world is just full of unavoidable suffering, where does that leave us? The argument follows this logic all the way to its radical and maybe inevitable conclusion. And this is antinatalism. Now, it's really important to be clear. The argument isn't based on hating people or hating children. In fact, its proponents would say it's the ultimate act of compassion. They argue that the only guaranteed way to prevent all future suffering is to simply not create the people who would have to endure it. So, what does this look like in practice? Well, it's a three-step proposal. First, a shift in perspective to see life as a net harm. Second, a collective, totally voluntary choice to stop having children. And this would naturally lead to the third step, a gradual, peaceful end to the human species over several generations. This idea of extinction is, of course, the most challenging part of this entire argument. So it is absolutely crucial to understand exactly what is and what is not being proposed here. And this distinction is everything. The proposal is not for violence or for ending existing lives. That would be a killing extinction. What it's advocating for is a dying extinction, a gentle fading out where humanity lives out its remaining lives, but simply chooses not to create a new generation to face all the harms of existence. And that brings us to the final provocative question this philosophy leaves us with. It forces us to weigh the value of creating future pleasures, which no one will miss if they don't exist, against the absolute certainty of creating future suffering. It's a challenging idea for sure, and one that fundamentally questions the very purpose of our own existence.